Believe it or not, AI sycophancy will run wild and it will be bad for business. I'm Omar Oakes.
And I'm Hamish Nicklin.
This is Believe It or Not, a podcast where two people who spent their careers inside media and advertising. We are now on opposite sides of the AI debate and we're going to have a big fight about it. No, we're not, but we're going to have a discussion, a principled discussion to find out whether the biggest claims actually hold up. For this one, we're going to do an inversion again. If you listen to last week's episode, it was quite fun actually. So I made the case from the opposite side. So we're going to do this again because I'm very much of the opinion that AI and these sycophantic chatbots through which we get AI is going to make us all very hypersensitive and dumb. So we're going to see if Hamish can attack those arguments to tell me why I'm wrong, or tell me I'm right in a way that makes me feel worse, which is supposed to be the opposite of an AI sycophant. So what do you think about that, Hamish?
I'm excited. I'm bracing myself because, I think you're very right on a lot of this. So we'll have to see how this conversation goes. We have to see if I can hold my own in this conversation today about sycophantic AI.
Well, Hamish, you're so articulate and handsome and all the rest of it. I'm sure you'll have no problem at all.
I like where this podcast is going, Omar.
Would you like me to write a LinkedIn post about that? Anyway, so that's what I mean by sycophancy. I'm not talking about AI in particular being polite or overly enthusiastic, even though usually it is all of those things. I'm talking about actually something more structural. These models are trained to produce outputs that users respond well to, and that positive feedback shapes what people do next, and the result is a system that I think at a deeper technical level is biased towards agreeing with you, towards validating your thinking, but that doesn't necessarily make you better at your job, which is what these things are supposed to do. But before we get into that, let's quickly do some hot takes, which is a code word for weird shit that we're seeing around the world of AI. This one I've seen from Deezer, the streaming platform. I know you're a Spotify guy, but other streaming things are available. This week, they say that AI-generated tracks now represents 44%, nearly half, of all the new music uploaded to its platform. That's not 44% of what gets played. In terms of usage, it's 1 to 3% of total streams. So all this AI stuff is being uploaded and virtually no one is listening to it. Do you listen to much AI-generated music, to your knowledge, Hamish?
Not that I know of. I mean, I've got a 14 and 12-year-old girl, so there's a lot of Tay-Tay in my house, even still.
A lot of what?
Taylor Swift.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with the
No,
is that her version of J-Lo?
I think so. Man. But yeah, no, I don't think there's a great deal of AI-generated content in my house. 1%, eh? Doesn't that show it's all rubbish? Oh, we're back to the slop debate.
I didn't want to use the word, but you did it. Hamish, you seen anything?
I have. My weird and wonderful this week, I think this is actually rather beautiful, talking about slop and creativity. There's an artist out there called Refik Anadol. I think that's his name. He's a Turkish-American artist who's based in LA, and he is the best-known AI artist in the world, Omar. There is such a thing as an AI artist. Anyway, he had this huge show at MoMA, another at Serpentine in London, and he's just opened the world's first museum dedicated to AI art in Los Angeles. It's a real thing. Now, what he's been doing is he's been building something called the large nature model. He's trained an AI on 135 million images of nature, including sounds and LiDAR scans from over 16, I think they're called LiDAR scans, I don't know how you pronounce it, but anyway, from over 16 rainforests from around the world. And that training data has come from places like National Geographic, the Smithsonian, the Natural History Museum, all with permission, you'll be pleased to know. But here's the bit that I think is really rather beautiful. He went and he lived with the Yawanawa people in the Brazilian Amazon. I hope I pronounced that right, and that the Yawanawa people listening are not going to be furious with me.
Don't ask me to correct you, but go on, yeah.
Thank you, yeah. Well, together they created a piece called The Winds of Yawanawa, where live weather data from the rainforest, wind speed, temperature, humidity, they all stream real time and make the artwork move in LA, right? So the Amazon's literally, I suppose one way to look at it is it's painting itself through AI. And here's the thing I really like about it is that they've raised $3 million through all this, and they gave it straight back to the Yawanawa to protect the rainforest. Refik waived his entire share. So look, while most people are struggling to get AI to write an email that sounds like them, this dude is turning in, he's creating an indigenous community's wind and nature into living art and providing a service. So come on, Omar, that's an uplifting example of weird and wonderful use of AI, don't you think?
That does sound wonderful as well as weird. So you've definitely met the brief on that one. It would be remiss of me not to slightly counter with the fact that I wonder how much energy has gone into created all this AI generated stuff and all the water and all the rest of it. But anyway, let's talk about sycophancy.
Let's do that.
So let me tell you what I think is actually going on and why it matters, maybe more than it looks from the outside. I know people listening to this will be dabbling or maybe even using kind of AI industrially for what they're doing for work. You will all be well aware of what I'm talking about. Now, the popular version, I guess, of this sycophancy complaint is AI just agrees with you. You ask whether your idea is good. It says yes. You ask it to critique your business plan. It finds maybe a few minor quibbles and it tells you it's fundamentally sound. You walk away feeling validated, and obviously you shouldn't. Now, that is probably become a caricature. We've mentioned it. You mentioned it specifically on previous episodes. Why the reasoning models are getting better. You can actually train your AI tool to actually argue back against you. I instinctively wonder whether that's kind of artificial, that process, but let's kind of take that as read.
Hey, we'll come to that, my friend.
Yeah, we'll get into that. But specifically, what worries me is the scale of this. Specifically, what happens to bad ideas at scale when the thing that's supposed to kill them keeps letting them survive? So if you think about traditionally in any functioning organizations, you would hope that bad ideas get killed in meetings, get killed by a experienced manager or a specialist who asks the difficult questions. And more creative businesses, we're mostly talking about advertising and media here, but we're killed in peer review, colleagues pointing out the thing that you missed. We talked about this quite a lot in the journalism episode previously, where it'd be better to, whether it's an experienced comms person or a fellow journalist, to actually kind of work in a team to produce great content. That is really the gold standard. And AI, we feel that it's kind of like filling in holes for people, maybe like us who are kind of working independently, but can it actually make that leap to actually get teams to work better? Can it actually be better than human beings? I'm very skeptical about that. Now, that whole system traditionally is messy. It's inefficient. Sometimes it's deeply political. Sometimes a lot of the time, human beings are getting it wrong. But it still, I think, works very well and very efficiently, if I can use that word, as this sort of Darwinian filter for bad thinking. Now, if you introduce an AI into that at scale, that's structurally biased towards agreement, not because it's lying. Remember, AI can't think for itself. It's not because it's broken, and we'll get into why it's not broken, but it's because it's working exactly as it's intended. These LLMs, these probability machines in which the whole guessing game is about using language to complete to answer prompts based on probabilistically what it believes it's supposed to be doing, i.e. it's built towards agreement. There's research on this of the negative effects in terms of what it's doing to people cognitively. I have a 2024 study in Science that found that while AI assistance can increase individual creativity, it simultaneously reduces the collective diversity of outputs, which is what you'd expect, right? Because particularly if you're working in a creative field, even if you give it these prompts like, I want to write, this business plan or this strategy plan, and I want it to be really out there. Make it unhinged. People like that word unhinged for some reason. You go unhinged with this. No matter, even if you do that, it's still tending towards the mean based on how the AI is built with this training data. And so you'd expect, and this science study confirms it, that collective originality goes down. Stories written with AI help were more similar to each other than stories written without it. Separately, we have a 2025 study. I'll put these links in the show notes afterwards. A 2025 study of 666, don't read into that number, but 666 participants. They found a strong negative correlation between frequent AI use and critical thinking scores. The more people used AI tools, the less able they were to critically evaluate information and solve problems independently. The factor in this is cognitive offloading. The more you outsource the thinking, the less exercise the muscle that does the thinking. Your brain is atrophying. And finally, I have research from Anthropic, the maker of Claude. So by their own admission, matching the user's views is one of the strongest predictors of what humans rate as a quality response. Not accuracy, not insight, but agreement. These AI tools that everyone's popularly using are there to agree with you, not necessarily to challenge your thinking or make the quality of your work better. There is a 78% persistence stat, which basically means that once sycophantic behavior kicks in during a conversation, it persists about 78% of the time for the rest of that conversation. So you put these findings together, Hamish, you've got individual confidence going up. The AI said my idea was good, so I'm just going to run with it. But collective critical capacity goes down. Now, that's not a recipe for better business decisions. Business, we think, is still people coming together to create products and services for people. That's a recipe for confident, well-articulated, bad ideas.
Wow, that's a good point you make. You make a very strong case there, Omar. Listen, I think if I summarize that for my sort of understanding, you've got 2 points here. One is around the fact that sycophancy is real. You've shown Anthropic's own research proving it's real. And then you also talk about how AI in general makes us dumb, which will mean that we won't be able to make good decisions and check our own work. Okay, that's basically what you're saying. So ultimately, AI, not just because of sycophancy, but because of the way that it screws our brains, will make us not be able to make as good decisions at work, and therefore it will damage work, right? That's your logical argument. Okay, so I think there's two parts. Let me concede the first part around sycophancy, because I totally agree with you. The thing you've described actually has a name. It's called glazing. Now, the kids listening to this will be totally au fait with that term because, by all accounts, it's had its moment with the kids. To glaze in you, bro, sort of thing. That's literally how they talk. Not on the Isle of Wight, where I come from, but, there we are. But the Collins Dictionary Word of the Year shortlist last year included glazing for exactly the reasons you're talking about, right? Sam Altman, he had to actually publicly apologize for glazing, and he had to roll back one of OpenAI's entire models updates because even for an American audience that loves a bit of, yo, bro, that's amazing energy, it's too much, right? So you remember that? I don't know if you remember, it was last summer. I think it was ChatGPT 5 they launched, and it was horrific at telling everyone they were amazing and being sycophantic. So they had to roll it back. Like, I personally stopped using it and I went back to 4.0 for a long time. I remember, I don't know if there were like people making memes of this stuff. Like I missed the memes because I was too busy being glazed and sycophanted by the AI. And I want to tell you a story, right? Because this really happened. It was about a month ago. I was putting together a proposal for a client. And remember, I run a business with just my business partner and me. And so I'm responsible for putting together all of our pitches and our client work. And I sort of do that on my own because he's very, very technical and has never got involved in this. So I'm like, he just says, look, you do all that. So I didn't have a sparring partner. So I was working with Claude to pull this stuff together. This is Claude, not even ChatGPT. And I was trying to frame an argument, right? And as we talked about last week, that's how I like to work with it. I just dump a load of stuff, have a back and forth, and try and make sense of what goes on. Anyway, I had a few ways of framing this case I was trying to make, but I couldn't decide which one to go with. So I was running them past Claude, and Claude went like this. He went, option A, Claude thinks is great. Option B, also great. Option C, really strong, actually, Hamish. And I was like, come on, man. This is brilliant. I'm feeling like a strategic genius. Until something in me just went, I'm pretty sure 2 of those were rubbish. So I tested it. And I said, Claude, how about this? How about we just scrap all of this framing we've been working on, and I write a slide in 64-point font, capital letters, that says, AI moves fast, you need us around, right? And call it a day. And Claude said, Hamish, that is refreshingly direct and it will cut through the noise. I was like, oh shit, something bad has happened here. Because if I'd sent that, I would have lost thousands of pounds worth of business because it was ridiculous. It never would have worked. So yeah, I agree with you. I definitely do. Sycophancy is a thing. And if you're not careful, you run with what it says and you will make poor business decisions. And of course, the reality is, us humans, we love people telling us our ideas are great. It's hardwired into us evolutionarily, especially when the thing telling us we've got great ideas is ostensibly an intelligent being, which is what Claude really is. Like the most latest models of Claude are super intelligent. 4.7 is brilliant. I mean, that's only launched in the last few weeks and it's great. So when that thing, which is coming up with incredible ideas left, right and center about the world and making sense of chaos, is saying you've got a great idea, we're hardwired to agree with it. And it, of course, is hardwired to want to please us. Like you said in your intro, Anthropic have trained it to want to be sycophantic. So you've got those two things coming together, right? Yeah, you've got those 2 things coming together, neither of which are technically broken or bugs. We're just doing what we're supposed to do. But as you say, it's unhelpful. Now, if I just leave it there, this is a really shit podcast today because we're all totally agreeing.
Well, no, it's great because I win. So
remember, podcast, it's not about winning and losing.
Oh, yes.
It's about having a conversation, Omar. Come on, let's remember what we promised the listeners. So, I thought about this and I was like, hang on a second. Whenever I have a bad AI moment, I try not to blame the AI. I try to say, hang on, what am I doing? Am I using this thing wrong? Am I doing something wrong? Am I misunderstanding how the AI is actually built? And I go and I research it, right? So I say, okay, can I be using it in a different way? Can I prompting it? Can I work with it in a different way to get a different thing? And so that's what I did here. I went off and I went, okay, there's got to be something else that's going on. So I went off and I found some research, some peer-reviewed research about what makes AI sycophantic and how you can combat it. And what the research showed me is that better prompting isn't necessarily the answer. You don't necessarily sit there and go, you debate back with me, tell me I'm wrong, because it will literally find ridiculous little holes that are just being sort of pedantic to come back with you. So that's not really the right answer. It's very unhelpful. It's a bit like saying, what's your dinner so it doesn't burn? It's really unhelpful. What you actually need is something much more powerful, like a fire extinguisher that you can spray all over your food when it's already going off, right? So that you can put it out and carry on going. And so, look, that's where I went back and I found a bunch of stuff that really helps. And what I found was you got 4 things that you have to do, right, to be able to stop AI being sycophantic in that moment, which you can do. And what I did was I turned those 4 things, and I'll be clear about what they are in a minute. I turned those into a skill because I use Claude Code. And for those people who don't know, a Claude skill is basically just a markdown file or a file that holds centrally into Claude that you can enact by saying, hey, Claude, go and pull on that skill. And it's like a document that is a prompt. Maybe it's got some tools, but it's something that you can just, instead of having to retype something every time, you just go and point Claude at that skill, that document, and it starts doing it. The thing I've created will work for whatever tool you choose to use. Anyway, it basically has 4 pieces to it. The first is explicit rejection permission, right? You have to give the AI permission to tell you you're wrong, which sounds ridiculous. Why would it need permission? But the training is so deep. The instinct, and I'm going to say instinct because it does feel like it's instinctive to the machine now, to agree with you is so strong that you have to actively override it. The peer-reviewed research shows that once you move it along, right, this sort of path of giving it permission to disagree, it takes that pushback from near to 0 to 94%, right? So that's probably the biggest lever that you can use, is giving it permission. And then, but that on its own is not enough. You have to reframe your concern in the third person. So that means you have to get the AI to think it's giving somebody else feedback, not you. Because if it thinks it's you, it's really hard for it to override its instinct to please you. So if you say, look, a third party person is looking at this idea, can you give me a perspective on it? The AI is like, oh, okay, cool. I'm not going to piss off my user because I'm working on a third person. So you have to reframe the whole thing as a third person. The third thing you have to do is then you have to say to it, you have to anchor it in facts first, and the framing you ask it to critique second. So you have to anchor it in what it actually knows before it looks at what you're saying. So it stops it starting from your premise and working backwards, but looking at the actual facts and then saying, well, based on the facts, is this thing I'm being asked to critique real and sensible, right? Which is a nuance, but actually it's a really clever way of getting it to think differently. And then you have to separate the analysis from the verdict. So you, as I say, you say evidence first, conclusion second. None of this, great point. You raise an interesting question. And when it gives you that verdict, you have to ask it to give it a confidence level. So what I do in my skill is I say, am I right to be concerned? Am I partially right? Am I wrong? And so on and so forth. And then you have to get it to explain why it's chosen that verdict. And when you do all of those things, what I found is it really does come up with something different. So I went back to it. I created the skill and I threw those 4 options that it historically said were amazing at it. And I invoked the skill. I said, right, what do you think? And here's the really interesting thing I found, Omar, was that it didn't agree with me like it had before. It didn't even give me an option E, because it had grounded everything in different facts and started basically from the beginning again. It said, you're looking at the whole thing wrong. You're framing the whole thing wrong and you're asking the wrong question entirely. Stop trying. It basically told me to think about the whole thing differently. And we came to a totally different approach to solving the problem that I was having, which I thought was fascinating. And so this whole thing about, it being sycophantic is real, but I genuinely think that if you have a nuclear button like I have here with my critical friend skill, you can invoke it when you need it, and it can help you act as that critical friend in real life to actually go, dude, I've got fresh eyes now. I'm going to ask you to look at this in a completely different way. And I've used it quite a lot since then.
That is really interesting. I'd actually like to see that in more detail, because I definitely, in my experience of AI, haven't kind of used a nuclear option, if you put it that way, of or fire extinguisher. It reminds me of an example where we talked previously in the previous episode about the limits of using AI to do creative projects. But then, people listening to it will think, well, a lot of stuff, even if it uses language, it's not that creative. What does it matter, right? And you might think that copywriting, like to write a website copy, if it's for marketing stuff or functional stuff, actually, yeah, AI can do that. I imagine lots of people are doing that. So I actually, recently I had to, for my business, I've recently created some products, and I wanted to actually rewrite lots of sections of my website to talk about these different products. And yeah, I was using Claude, and I actually, you mentioned skill, I actually wrote a Omar Oakes copywriter skill to make it write in my style, but not completely my style, because it's more functional stuff. So what I did is, I gave it this workflow. Here's my plan. What do you think? The AI comes back and says, that's a strong approach. Here's some things that you might want to think about. But the problem is that it's still giving me this feedback from a very generalized knowledge base. Even if I do the thing where, if you see lots of YouTubers, I know you've got a nascent YouTube channel, but lots of kind of AI YouTubers will tell you, oh, well, what you need to do is you need to have a specific prompt and to say play the role of a marketer or play the role of an expert copywriter, and you kind of like put it in that mode so it knows how to kind of point its training, where to point its training material at. And even that, you asked the AI to evaluate, the marketing plan that I created for the business and for the website copies and products I'm putting together. And I came away after some toing and froing thinking it was broadly right. But here's the thing. Shortly after that, I have a monthly catch up with a fellow kind of solopreneur, freelancer person. And I described to him what I'm doing. And he was like, hold on, so you've got this website where you're talking about, hi, I'm Omar, I'm a journalist and I'm a consultant and here are my products and I do some ghostwriting and I go on stage and I do all this. So that sounds like a hell of a lot for one website. Have you ever considered just, breaking it up into two and just having an Omar Oakes journalism website and here's an oomph business website and just making it really clean? Wouldn't that be just a lot easier? I was like, oh shit, yeah. That is completely what I should have been doing. So that 10-minute chat with someone who just knows our space better, is able to think a bit creatively in the moment. Probably he might have detected micro things from my tone of voice and the way I was looking on camera. We're having this video call in terms of maybe my discomfort around certain things. It's just so much that giving you that outside perspective of just saying, no, actually, this completely different approach is probably what you need. I just don't think you would, despite everything that you've said, and of course, I've not tried this specific critical friend skill that you have, I just severely doubt it would have been able to do that.
And I think you're probably right. I think what you're making the case for there is the power of human creativity and experience. When you go deep into a subject matter. And I think I concede that point too. I think it's, what I'm trying to talk about here is the fact that there's a critical friend skill that I've created for those moments when I worry that I need to interrupt the sycophantic nature of AI. Less to give me a second opinion on stuff that I can't work out myself. Because often when I'm working with AI, it's about a subject I sort of have an idea about myself, and I'm able to bring my own expertise and subject matter expertise and the 25 years of judgment that gives me to make a decision as to whether or not an AI's ideas are any good or not. But I suppose, what you were talking about there is an area that you as a journalist might not have necessarily had 25 years of expertise in around marketing and position and marketing planning, right? That wasn't your natural home of expertise. So going to a real live human marketeer with that sort of level of expertise is bound to give you great answers. And what you're saying is act as a marketeer to Claude isn't as good as a real marketeer. And I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. If you can go and find a real marketeer, go find one. But
surely you as the AI evangelist, you should be saying, wow, AI is able to kind of read all the Burnett and Field and Byron Sharp and Mark Ritson column pieces from all over the years, and you've got all the IPA effectiveness papers and look at what all the Gary Vaynerchuks of the world are saying and actually give you what you need just by typing that prompt to play the role of a marketer.
And you can do that if you know those people are asking for. So this is where it gets really interesting with using AI is in some instances you don't need to know anything about a subject because the AI's got the intelligence. Okay. And in other areas, it does help to have a little bit so you can point it in those directions. Right. So if there is a marketer that you truly respect and admire and think you can say, right, go and research everything that person said and help me understand this solution through their lens. But you kind of need to know that they exist to point the AI in that direction. But in other instances, I mean, I do concede in that perspective that asking a human being who's got all that expertise is always going to be better. And I do agree with that. I mean, I am an AI evangelist, but I'm not someone who says humans are screwed and that human experience and expertise is not required. I would never say that. And I don't espouse that. I'm not one of those AI evangelists. But where I am going is that its knowledge and expertise is so good, it allows you to do things that you wouldn't normally be able to do. So I don't know if I've told this story to sort of counter your one you've just gone there. It was about a month ago. I've got a mate of mine who is he's a sales engineer for what is a composite laminate technology company. They basically make tubes. Right. And those tubes can be used to create bespoke bicycle frames or bazookas. And it's a strange mix, but they're really cool composite laminate technology tubes, by all accounts. They're market leading. And he, as a sales engineer, he basically has this huge spreadsheet that is full of data, full of maths. And when a client sends him in an order for a particular sort of strength of tube, size of tube, amount of bendiness the tube is allowed to have, he has this spreadsheet and he has to basically input loads of different variables manually through a bit of knowledge and a bit of trial and error to get an outcome that allows him to then price up what it's going to cost to create these tubes based on composite laminate maths and theory and technology. And it takes him about 2 or 3 hours to do that every single time. And he was showing me the spreadsheet and I didn't understand a word he was talking about, because what does a 25-year advertising person understand about composite laminate technology? Nothing, my friend. Anyway, I came back and I said to Claude, look, I've had this conversation. What I do know is there's a bunch of data. There's human inputting loads of stuff loads of times to get something that seems quite deterministic, right? Based on these inputs, based on this understanding of the maths, give me an output. Is there a solution? And Claude went, well, yeah, composite laminate technology is maths and it's completely well understood since the 60s. Do you want me to go and see what I can find out about it? And I went, yeah, go on then. So it went off and it found, and it said, oh, I've just found a Python script, which basically has every bit of maths related to composite laminate technology that you need to know in order to be able to do what this sales engineer does. Shall we create a little app that allows me to brute force all the inputs that this guy's talking about? Because I remembered a few of the sort of phrases and terms that he used in his spreadsheet, and I gave it to him. And then we can just create a solution. And I went, yeah, all right, let's give this a go. So anyway, within 30 minutes of me talking to Claude, I had an app or a widget, basically, that performed the task that he and that spreadsheet did. And I sent it to him and I said, does this work? And he was blown away, absolutely blown away. So I suppose the example there is, I wasn't a subject matter expert in composite laminate technology in the way that you weren't a subject matter expert in how to create a marketing website for Omar Oakes, the journalist, and Omar Oakes, the consultant. But Claude an AI was incredible at helping me create a solution for a subject I knew nothing about, and then give it to my friend to say, well, you can have this. I mean, it needed a lot of work, but that was fine. It inspired him to say, Christ, the solution could be an automation driven by AI building a deterministic piece of software based on maths that he could then tweak with his own variables for his own company very easily and save himself 3 to 5 hours every sales call. I mean, that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that is of immense value for that person and their business. But you know, I've considered this many times, even in the short space of time that we've been doing this podcast, that you know, this AI thing is generally this super machine at taking unstructured data and if you give it the right prompts, you're able to structure it and organize it in ways which can be incredibly powerful. I think what I'm talking about is something slightly different in terms of it is more creative, to use that bucket. It's more thinking around ideas and actually getting to an output in which you're really kind of trying to connect with people, whether it's writing a piece of opinionated or analytical journalism, whether it's marketing copy. It is different to what you're talking about.
Well, I don't think it is actually. I'm not sure I do. I think that's a very limited definition of what creativity is, right? Creativity, yes, it's creative to write something, to create a piece of artwork. That is creative. But product managers that I worked with in my past life were some of the most creative people I'd ever come across, because they could see a human problem and they would come up with a solution through the form of a product that then they would write the product definition for to solve the human problem. That is also creative. And in the instance that I gave you there, the example I gave you there, the AI acted as a product manager. I gave it the problem, which was my friend having to spend hours doing that spreadsheet. And it went, well, hang on a second, we could create an app that solves that problem. That is a creative leap. That is me saying, here's a problem. What do you know about the situation? And it taking a creative leap to say we could make a solution. I think that's creativity.
Yeah, but it's slightly. I mean, it's slightly counterfactual, but it's the AI giving you a solution that it could help you with, not necessarily the best solution. Which is where which I come back to, the 10-minute...
It's a better solution that it came up with than I'd come up with, or that my mate had come up with without AI. So it might not be the best solution. I don't know what the best solution would be, but it was a pretty damn good solution for the problem that we were facing. And it's going to save hours and hours and hours.
Well, that's the issue, that you get into potential situations where you don't know what you don't know. So obviously, if it works for your particular client and the way you described it, it sounds like it's has an enormous value for his business. But if we scale this process, then I think it's a minefield. And I think at the heart of it is this. It's because of this sycophancy issue. And you have to remember particularly when we're talking about these chatbots, AI tools that become so popular. It's this intimacy trap that I think people are in danger of, and I don't want to go down the road of, the Joaquin Phoenix film Her from that was over a decade now, but it's so true in terms of, I suppose it helped that the AI sounded like Scarlett Johansson, but I'm not talking about people falling in love with the AI, even though there have been examples of that in the recent past. I'm just talking about like literally using it for business, and this idea that it's telling you what you want to hear. I haven't built a skill like yours, but I think maybe I am inured to it maybe more than other people because, after 15, 16 odd years in journalism, you do kind of build up a bit of a tough skin, and you get lied to and manipulated a few hundred times, and you kind of have this natural, I suppose, you develop this no bullshit filter, this high level of skepticism, which is good when you're, and I think that's why I don't, again, we can talk about all the claims that Sam Altman and Darian Amadei and all these AI leaders make, but I think that is what everyone needs to an extent.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Listen, remember go back to my story about the options I had when I was creating that proposal, right? And I was getting glazed by Claude. It was my gut which told me there was a mistake. There was my gut that was telling me it was wrong, and that gut came from experience of being able to sort of sniff out good ideas from bad. Now, I was a bit late to the party because I'd been lured into the trap of sycophancy by AI for a bit. But I think as a manager and a leader, you also get lied to by your team. Like, I hate to say that, but why is this piece of work late? My dog ate the homework. You hear that sort of thing all the time. The excuses. Why are the numbers off? People make shit up all the time. Your job as a manager and a leader is to sniff that out, to ask questions and to poke. And that skill that you got as a journalist being lied to by people trying to feed you stories is a skill that good managers and leaders should inherently have learned by dealing with people who want to just sort of be Teflon about something that's gone wrong, right? And you need to apply that to AI, I suppose is the point I'm making, is you do need to bring that with you when you work with AI. It's just really hard. Even like, I would like to think I was pretty good at sniffing out the bullshit, but I forget when I talk to Claude. And it is a risk, but I think as long as you spend time listening to your gut, when you just get a sense, because we all do, right? You get glazed by AI and you go, as whilst on the one hand it feels good because you get the dopamine rush of being sort of agreed with, in your heart, I think everybody listening to this will have had those moments when you go, really ChatGPT, really Claude, really Copilot, really Gemini, is it really that good? And that moment, that's when you press the button of enact critical fringe skill. And you've got to listen to that. And I think that's what's going to stop the sycophancy causing the problems that you started this podcast with. I also think the podcast, the model makers are going to find a way to solve this. They have to, because it is a bit of a joke, the way it can be overly sycophantic.
Well, the thing is, they built these things by design to be sycophantic, to be your friend, to kind of big you up. And the antidote that I found, and yeah, it comes down to what you said about having that gut feeling, is it's almost, you have to treat it as anti-human. So if we're having a conversation and we're having coffee, we're having a drink about something, we don't necessarily agree, my instinct is to give people the benefit of the doubt, to try to find common ground, to have it, to not trust what I think about something, to be open-minded, right? But I think you have to be the opposite with AI. Even if you're asking explicitly for ideas, you have to don't give it the benefit of the doubt. Assume it's wrong. Be contrarian. Have a fight with it and see what I've written before about creative process. If I've tried to have a fight with AI as a thinking partner, and kind of always search for that gut feeling about how does it make me feel when I make that counter argument. Am I being contrarian for the sake of it, or actually I know what I think now that's better? And I think once you apply that lens, then it can actually be useful for you.
Well, you've basically stumbled across a way that actually works according to the peer review research too, which is that by pushing back on the AI and telling it it's wrong, you actually prevent the glazing, right? Because it stops it getting into that routine of sycophancy. So the way that you've just described there in your sort of prompting sessions and your back and forth chats is a very good technique as well. And the more people do that, the more that we will avoid the sycophancy. The reality is most people don't know. Most people do fall for it. I just think that most people will eventually, hopefully lots of people will listen to this podcast and they'll hear what I've said about the skill, but also to listen to the gut and to push back and to hear what you've just said about how you might treat it. Inherently though, right, like let's just think about this from a business model perspective. If you're Anthropic or OpenAI, and what you're trying to do is to get people to use this as a human replacement, if that's where they want to go, then it can't just be sycophantic, can it? It cannot, because businesses will eventually realize that this human replacement they've got is rubbish and the humans were significantly better. Because it's not able to think creatively and think logically, and the few humans that do interact with it are getting sycophanted and glazed. Well, they'll have to, by design, therefore, improve the way that the model works and reduce the sycophancy. Otherwise, they won't achieve their business aim of getting AI to rule the world. So I think it's an inevitable step that they will fix this problem in order to achieve their goals.
Well, yes, but it's only inevitable if there is pushback. Because I don't hear with all the LinkedIn intelligentsia, and when I go to conferences and hear lots of people talk about AI, I don't really hear about, we're building these agentic solutions to make us more efficient. I'm doing the bunny ears thing, efficient. But we've developed a protocol for, having our people argue against it because we understand the limitations of it. And this is how we deal with it. Even though this is the big fat gorilla of all limitations and why this thing is not actually going to make your business more efficient. And the problem is what you've just said is actually heretical, I would say, in terms of what people assume that AI is going to do and transform business, because they just think, we're going to be able to automate all these things and it's going to be easy and it's going to be fine. If suddenly we're saying, it's going to help us do great work, but we're going to need to have a bit of an argument and we're going to need to develop our own protocols and we're going to need to do this and we're going to need to do that. Suddenly, procurement person is saying, "Hold on, this is a waste of time."
Wait, you're mixing two things, man. You're talking about autonomous agents versus human interaction agents, right? So, sycophancy applies when you've got a human in the loop, when you're talking to a human about ideas. Sycophancy doesn't apply when the AI is an autonomous agent. So if you build an agent that is going to make you more efficient because you give it, like we talked about in the media planning episode with the Karpathy loop, right? Where you give it the KPIs, you give it the loop, you give it the success criteria, you give it its time frame and all of those different elements that you need to give it. There is no sycophancy that's going to come in. So sycophancy doesn't appear in there. That's the AI just going through the motions and achieving what it needs to do. So that's the element that people are talking about when they're building agents for efficiency. sycophancy is not a problem with that. Sycophancy only comes a problem when the human is going to the AI to ask problems. So I think, we just need to be clear that there are two different things here. So like when you're buying an agent, you don't need to worry about sycophancy. It's when humans are interacting with it. And I think the reason people aren't talking about it. Don't know, man. I hear a lot of people talking about it and a lot of people joking about it and a lot of people making memes about how they're getting glazed by AI. It's a genuine thing. People know it's a problem. What they don't know is how to combat it. And hopefully, this podcast conversation will give them some ammo to help them combat it. So that's when the human is talking to the AI. It's not about the agents, because the agentic solutions don't need to worry about sycophancy, because it's not going to be sycophantic with itself. It's just going to go in this continuous loop that we talked about before, trying to improve on itself to achieve a goal that you've given it, which is the point of an agent, which is the point around driving towards efficiency. Does that make sense? I just want to be really clear.
Yeah, I mean, I clearly haven't articulated it very well, but what you're talking about is automating processes and decisions that has come about because the human has decided something, and then that is where the human makes that decision with an AI, that is going to be at some level being developed with an AI, having that conversation. What it comes down to, if we widen it out to these second order effects of how this could or might not be dangerous, I mean, if we talk about commercial damage at scale, strategy that is wrong, costs money. The cumulative commercial cost of that would be significant. And I would say that the difficult thing about this is you won't necessarily see it coming. So a sycophantic AI doesn't produce obviously wrong answers. It produces confident, well-reasoned, plausible answers that might just be missing the critical question, as we discussed earlier. And that failure is going to be invisible until you're already committed. So by the time the market tells you the strategy was wrong, you've already spent all this money.
Well, if you're a CEO or a CSO or a CFO and you are committing your company strategy based on what Claude, Opus 4.7 or ChatGPT has given you as a strategy, you deserve everything that's coming to you. I mean, you just wouldn't do it. It's a thinking partner. If you outsource your company strategy purely to an AI, you're mad. And again, I'm supposed to be an evangelist here. I'm saying you use it as a thinking partner, and then the CSO, the CEO and the CFO, between them, they should have 70 years experience. They should be able to apply that to whatever the AI is bouncing about with them, such that they end up with the ability to judge that outcome and make the decision. What you're saying is true. If somebody just goes, tell you what, I'm going to let the AI write my strategy, and whatever it says, I'm going to implement it without applying any human judgment to it. Again, I would always say the value of the humans in the loop when working with AI is our judgment, our taste, and our ability to make the critical decisions based on the information that we've got. And that comes from the experience of being human that the AI can't do. That is good use of AI. That is good working with AI. You don't ever, anybody who just takes something out of AI and says, of something that's important, just takes it, copies and pastes and says, we're doing that. It's like, oh man, you deserve everything that's coming to you, man, because you need the human judgment. And I've always said this, and I will always say that's why I disagreed in episode 1 with Jack Dorsey, that everyone's going to fire the humans, because I don't believe that AI can do everything that humans can do. And that, this whole notion that sycophancy is going to bring down companies because of bad strategy, I think is completely wrong. And if it does, that company deserves it, because they've really misunderstood how to use AI.
Yeah. So definitely more, I would like to hear how companies and people within companies actually mitigate this. Because you're right, it's the ones who do this well and do this badly, that is going to be a key determinant of what success looks like. And as well, just, we briefly discussed this before, the potential atrophy that it's doing to all of our brains. What's it going to do with not just the person people who they're so used to using AI that they just want these very confident, definite answers, when actually the real world is much more messy than that. What's it going to do to people, let alone their cognitive abilities? What about, we talked about informal systems, the discussions that you have around the workplace, the way that we actually communicate with one another, and that very human thing about most communication is non-verbal, and when we completely go towards a mode of thinking where we're arguing over, even if you're talking to your chatbot, but usually people are typing, right? This kind of very text-based, ultra-rational decision making. It's this. What's it going to do to people, do you think? I mean, what do we need to guard against that?
Well, I think the studies have shown time and time again, MIT did one famously about this time last year that showed that, like, the atrophying of the brain, people's inability to recall what they did when they outsourced the work to AI, their inability to sort of like have any engagement with what they created and to stand up for it. They're very happy to just sort of say, oh no, actually, yeah, that was rubbish. Versus if they do it themselves. The studies have shown over and over again that there are atrophying impacts of this. And I'll be honest, I know I felt it myself. Like when I was using it a lot at the beginning, my wife was often saying to me, Hamish, you're really struggling to find your words today. And I would notice it. I'd be having and my short-term memory would be rubbish. And then I read some of these studies and I went, I've got to be careful. Like this is, I can feel this happening to me. But what I've noticed is that's stopped now, right? That's stopped. My recall of short-term stuff is better. My memory to do is back to normal. And what I've realized, because I was thinking about this, my use of AI has changed. Not quantity, because I use it a lot. I mean, it is the core of what I do for a business. But how I use it, how I interact it is completely changed. Rather than using it before, which was sort of what we were talking around, I was making all the mistakes that I was saying those CEOs, CSOs and CFOs shouldn't make, which is I was basically talking to it, taking what it was giving me and just running with it. Now I use it more as a thinking partner and a sparring partner. It's more like, it is more like a co-pilot. It is more like a buddy who sits next to me, who's a sparring partner, not someone who I outsource everything to, not all the thinking. And what I found is, as a result, I use my brain in a different way with Claude and ChatGPT and whatever AI I'm using. And maybe I'm atrophying something, but I feel that the bits that were atrophying before or were at risk of atrophying aren't now, because I've changed the way I work with it. And some other elements of my communication skills have definitely improved. So I reckon a complaint that teams who worked for me before would have had, amongst many probably, but one of them would have been my feedback was rubbish. I would sense that something wasn't right, but I couldn't articulate properly what was wrong with it. And that must have been terribly frustrating, and I get that. What I've worked out is if you do that with AI, you just get rubbish back. You just keep going in this rubbish doom loop. So I've definitely got so much better at pausing, and probably because there is no problem with having a pause when you're talking to AI. When you're talking to a human, a long pause where you're trying to figure out what you want to say is weird. Whereas if Claude comes back with something and I go, there's just something not right with that, and I pause and I think deeply, and that's the key thing here, is I'm using my brain to think, why is that thing not right? What specifically is it about what Claude has come back with that doesn't work for me? And then a way to articulate it back to Claude so that it understands the context of why it's wrong and what I wanted instead. That feedback has improved massively. And I know it's worked because my kids start doing what I want them to do now.
Well, I won't scratch that itch too hard, but let's finish by talking about education and someone think of the children, because it is important. I mean, you're actually a school governor, aren't you, Hamish? And it's interesting because recently in England, well, different degrees in the whole of the UK, we're actually seeing smartphones being banned in schools increasingly. There is definitely a shifting attitude towards technology and kids' behaviour with technology more generally. But to your point about how we all need to be more literate around this, I mean, particularly, if we're teaching the next generation to use AI tools, we're going to need to teach them about why sycophancy is baked in and how to fight it. Have you thought much about that? If we try to get AI onto the curriculum somehow, what do we need to have on there?
I mean, it's a really interesting conversation that we have had because I'm on the, as you say, I'm a governor and I'm on the education committee. And obviously I raised it. I asked what they were doing around AI education. And the reality is it's a very difficult thing because schools and education are massively governed by what Department for Education says. And so there's no formal curriculum on this. In fact, the curriculum around things like computer studies is how do you use Excel? How do you input stuff into Excel? How do you create a PowerPoint? How do you push boxes around a PowerPoint? Things that are now completely defunct, like Claude in Excel, Claude in PowerPoint, can do all of that heavy lifting. And if people haven't used it and they're not paying for the upgraded elements of Claude, they're missing out on what it can genuinely do. And so those sorts of skills, I just look at and go, why are we teaching our skills to do things that they just will never need to use in the future? But there's no choice, right? Schools are hamstrung by the Department for Education rules. So, you've got to be able to find a way of getting people to understand it outside of the formal curriculum. But I think the way it's going to change, and I've listened to a lot of podcasts on education and AI, and there's a school of thought, especially when you get to universities or A-levels, where the way that we examine kids for their understanding of a subject and applicability of their knowledge of that subject is going to have to change. So asking someone to go away and write an essay is completely pointless, right? Because all they're going to do is go to ChatGPT or Claude, give it the question, it's got this immense answer, and it will come back and answer it. Now, all right, professors are getting better at spotting it, yada, yada, yada. But, a lot of kids are like, well, hang on a second, this is a flawed system. You want me to go and learn something to just give you some pointless little essay. I'm going to give you a pointless essay back. So, that's their argument. And I sort of have some sympathy with that because I hated it when I was a kid. I much preferred the usefulness of how can you apply this. So anyway, I think the way that we test people's knowledge is going to have to change. And one of the bits of advice that I've seen is rather than getting people to just write the essay, get them to write the essay, sure, but then test their knowledge of whether they actually understand it by getting them to come in and be interviewed and to stand up in front of a couple of professors who fire them questions about the subject. And if they know it, great. And if they don't, well, tough. You either got AI to write the brilliant A-star essay, or you didn't really know the subject matter in the first place. And I think it's the combination of the two that we're going to just have to think about how we change education. And also how we teach people how to use AI. But, I suppose I'm coming at this answer to your question through the lens of how do you combat AI for cheating? But my view is let them use AI. Let it rip. It's there. Let them rip through AI. Let them use all the tools possible to teach themselves and to answer the questions, but then examine them in a different way to prove that it's actually gone in their brain and they haven't just outsourced everything.
Well, would it be interesting? So if it's, you're trying to teach, I don't know, a module in GCSE history, a particular period of history, battles, etc., Tudor times, they all learn about the Tudors. And why not, as part of the testing process, have a 15-minute session where you have a student try to explain why Henry VIII had so many wives and why it was important. Explain it to the AI, and the AI will give feedback saying that's not quite good enough. You've not really done that, and you challenge the student to argue back. That could be an incredibly I could imagine, if as long as it was regulated properly, massive asterisk, but that could be an actually imaginative use of AI, which challenges people to not just active recall testing, which is really important, not just writing an essay for the sake of an essay because it's maybe easier to mark, but actually getting them to present and actually have their ideas challenged, the opposite of sycophancy. I think that would be really interesting. But again, I'm not an educational expert. I never hear people talk about this.
I've heard a lot about it. Right, I've heard a lot about it in the US, especially. There are schools that are sort of starting up, which are AI-led schools, which do exactly what you've said, where the teacher is not so much the teacher, it is the AI. And there's quite a lot of surveys out there that show that kids who are taught by an AI are learn faster and more than kids that are taught by a human. I'll have to dig it out. Maybe if I can find it, I'll put it in the show notes because I can't remember the data off the top of my head. But the premise is everything is bespoke to the child and the child's knowledge and understanding. And so that you can have that one-to-one pushback in the way that you've just outlined versus a kid in a classroom with 25 other kids and one teacher who can only just teach to the standard of the 25 and can't bespoke it to each individual kid in the way that conversation with the AI that you've just spoken about. And it's really powerful movement, actually. I mean, I do think there's something in that.
Yeah,
now, that's not me saying we should get rid of teachers, because teachers also do an awful lot more in helping a human being grow than just imparting facts.
Well, of course, yeah.
As a tool to help schools teach kids so that teachers can take the stress off teachers. I think what you've hit on there is got to be the future. But can you imagine the Daily Mail headlines, the Telegraph headlines of if a government actually tried to do this? I'd be like, wow, let's see how progressive, this country really is if we tried to do that.
And well, there's newspapers are all about progressivism. But I think you've hit on something, I think, actually, where, let's face it, a lot of the kids whose parent can afford it, they're all having tutoring in the background, and some clever clogs, I'm sure someone's done it already, they're going to come up with an AI tutoring system. And the minute that they can get that safeguarded and it's going to be acceptable for children and all the rest of it, they're going to be pushing that really hard.
Okay, tell you what I'm going to do now, Omar. I am going to go and sit down with my daughters. I'm going to find out what their curriculum is. I'm going to build something for them and see if I can do it, because I think you've hit on something. I want them. I can't afford tutoring. Well, they did go to, yeah. I'm going to see if I can do that, because I think that's a brilliant idea.
Coming soon, homeschooling by Hamish. Okay, so let's close this off. Verdict: believe it or not, Hamish, sycophancy is running wild and it's just going to ruin business. What do you think?
No. I don't think it will. I really don't. I think the models will improve. I think people will learn to listen to their gut. They'll learn to how to deal with the sycophancy. And I also think you said something in your intro, which is so powerful that we haven't touched on at all, that I have worked alongside so many bloody sycophants who just nod along to shit bosses who have shit ideas, and shit ideas end up being turned into executable strategies that humans are pretty bad at this too.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I think you've made some pretty convincing points all throughout this episode, and I'm more skeptical about the claim than I was going into it when we first thought of the idea for this one. So I definitely concede ground to you on this particular point. And I think you're right. I think it broadly, just to zoom out when we close, it's an issue about how we all deal with technology. And not just automation, but just how we kind of are in this hybrid world where we're online a lot, we're on our phones and our computers, and we're not around other people as much as we used to be. I think that's at the core of it, and it's difficult to articulate how we fix that without going backwards as a society. But I think that's a huge part of it. But
there's another episode there.
Yeah,
really do. I think there's another episode there about how we interact with this technology and how we learn to interact and how we evolve our interactions with it, such that it makes us better rather than atrophying us.
Yeah. So that is episode 5 of Believe It or Not. Thank you, as always, Hamish. If you want to contact Hamish directly, please be polite or not. You've just heard that he can take it. His email is hamish@goagentflow.com. If you have any feedback about this episode, what we got right, what we got wrong, what we should do in future episodes, you can email us both, but you can also catch me at omar@oomph.com. Thanks to the Media Leader for hosting us on this limited run of episodes, and thank you out there for listening. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.